Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's customer webinar, Kount Conversations, how to get the most out of Omniscore. We're super excited to walk through the content today. Presenters that we have on board are Sean Ippolito, who started at Kount as a BI analyst, building expertise in data analysis, automation, and Kount's machine learning and AI products. After receiving a master's degree in math from Boise State University with a focus on linear algebra, topology, and econometrics, he now focuses his time building and improving our core fraud-fighting machine learning technologies, particularly Omniscore. And apart from work, Sean enjoys playing guitar and spending time with his cats. We also have Adriana Villafana Barajas, who many of you may know from her experience on the customer success team. Adriana is a product marketing manager here at Kount, but she has years of experience in account management, customer success, and product marketing. And then my name is Maddie Smale. I am the customer marketer here at Kount. So again, very excited to walk through today's topic. To get us started, we're going to discuss Kount's AI-driven transaction safety rating, Omniscore, the star of the show, and how Omniscore is built to work for you. We're going to talk through how chargebacks can actually be useful, how to better understand Omniscore and how it marries with your organization's specific data, and how you can use Omniscore to move the needle for your business. And after this presentation, we're going to go through a number of customer questions that we received prior to the webinar. So stay tuned for the end. We may answer yours live. All right, and to kick things off, we want to address a handful of customer questions that we received that fall in the same vein of what is Omniscore, right? How is it calculated? What does it consider? And what influences the score? So to answer those questions, I'll pass along to Sean to walk us through the answers.
Great, thanks, Maddie. Well, while I am going to get to all those questions throughout this webinar, I'm going to start really simple. And that's what is Omniscore and how is it calculated? So Omniscore is a safety rating based on the payment data of your transactions calculated through a combination of supervised and unsupervised machine learning. It's twice as effective than previous models at detecting payments fraud while maintaining Kount's 250 millisecond response rate. Our highly predictive score can be relied upon by itself when decisioning orders so that there's less reliance on manual review. Right, and that can be a lower cost to you. By combining these approaches and using our vast data network, the result is less false positives and negatives, as well as more good transactions to generate revenue.
Sean, and now to put this in layman terms regarding supervised and unsupervised machine learning, I will use an analogy of a child learning to swim. So in the supervised learning scenario, a child would enter a swimming pool on his or her own and start learning via trial and error, using intuition and detecting those patterns as they emerge. On the other hand, in the supervised scenario, a child would be taught by a parent one step at a time. A child would receive feedback on his or her efforts and would learn from historical experience of the parent. So now I'm going to pass it back to Sean and Maddie.
Yeah, none of those examples are super helpful. Sean, will pass it to you here to carry us through.
Thank you. So yeah, why would you use Omniscore? So Kount's data network really is a fraud fighting ecosystem. We have a high volume and variety of data. We have tons of tuned models and experts kind of combined into one package under one roof to fight fraud and give better results. We have expert fraud analysts with years of training that can, while expert fraud analysts could review dozens or hundreds of orders per shift, looking at a few dozen or so data points per order, but we have hundreds of data points and millions, or rather billions of transactions. And one fraud analyst or a team of fraud analysts could never hope to review all of them. So the real value of machine learning is scaling up the fraud analyst's role in making decisions on countless orders. And essentially, we've learned all this hard stuff already and do it all behind the scenes, so you don't have to worry about it.
And I just quickly want to reiterate that not only is Omniscore a very powerful score, but it is also easy to use and interpret. So Omniscore follows a distribution which facilitates predicting your decline or review rate based on your chosen threshold, and we'll dive into it here in the next slide.
So simply put, Omniscore is a safety rating. 0 is bad, 100 is good. and I like to think of it as like grading on a curve. So like the riskiest 5% would be a score between 0 and 60. The safest 75% of scores or transactions would lie between 80 and 100. And those that are a little bit less safe, another 20% of transactions you'd see is a score between 60 and 80. And when I say grading on the score, think of it this way. Think of an AP class where even like the worst student in that class is a very good student compared to the average or vice versa. So that, this description, while it may hold true, whether you're kind of, you have a really high performing class or, a class that's still like learning the basics, the important thing is like that description that you might see here, whether it's very risky, significant indicators of risk or fraud, or very safe, or somewhere in the middle, it's only a guideline. Depending on where you're at in your fraud journey or the population of transactions you're looking at, you could have very few indicators of risk going down to low score or many risk factors going into the higher scores. It really depends on, where you're at, whether you're in a chargeback program or whether you have years of tuning, approaching your fraud problem and tuning that score and in your fraud fighting journey.
If you have any questions, I would encourage you to head over to our support site at support.kount.com. Our document on Omniscore includes this chart and describes that Omniscore in detail, just in case you need something to reference back. And it's just in a written form so you can visually learn and see this table on Omniscore.
Yeah, thanks, Adriana.
Reiterate that learning on a curve analogy, depending on a merchant's level of traffic and their configuration of sales channel, or as many of you may know, site ID, we can grade transactions on that curve described before. So that way, if you have a highly risky segment of business or lower risk, you can segment that traffic and have one simple Omniscore threshold for each of those channels of your business. So that way, we could very easily, make decisions on orders with just simply a score. We have learned from years of combined experience in merchants who understand their fraud and want to share this with you. Our customer success team can help you start, and then you can learn to be self-sufficient over time. Furthermore, our anomaly reporting to CSMs helps them stay on top of anomalous activity and mitigate threats as they develop in real time.
When it comes to identifying and locating that ideal tolerance and have it line up with your risk profile, step one is to identify your business goals. Know where you want to be in terms of decline or review rate. And that's assuming you have a review process in place. If not, don't worry about that review rate. Once you have your target set, the next step is to identify where you stand. Data Mart is a very powerful data mining tool where you can create reports to keep tabs on your account performance and metrics. These reports can be automated and scheduled for delivery at your desired cadence. And so now that you've identified your target and your standing, it's time to make those two line up. And rule optimization analysis can help identify how you can edit or update your rules and policies to create that ideal threshold to meet your business goals and metrics. So now I'm just going to pass it back to Sean and Maddie.
Now we can kind of go into the machine learning models behind everything. So you might ask yourself, what is machine learning? Really simply, it's the use of algorithms and statistical models to analyze and draw inferences from patterns in data. And so first of all, like learning patterns, when it comes to that, what we're looking for must be well defined, right? If you want an answer, you got to know what question you're asking first. So you have to ask, what kind of problem is this? There's lots of different kinds of machine learning problems. Two broad categories would be regression and classification. Regression would be like maybe modeling house prices, predicting house prices. Depending on the number of bedrooms you have, the square footage, and the location, you might be able to figure out what the price might be or should be. And on the other side of things, we have classification and things like image tagging. You take a picture and ask yourself, do I see a dog? or a cat or something else in this picture. And to note that both of these examples are supervised, and there's also unsupervised approaches as well. Now, what is considered a good model? Now, in physics and economics and really any other kind of scientific profession, a scientist may come up with a mathematical or a mental model of the relationship between like inputs and outputs in some sort of system. Think of gravity, planetary motion, GDP, international trade, and even, decision making. And that's kind of what we think about a lot here is decision making for, good customers and for fraudsters. And so a model can represent those things, but also we can try many models to learn unobserved or unknown patterns as well. And that's where, these kind of algorithms that you've heard of, neural networks, decision trees, random forests, linear regression, support vector machines, all these sorts of different things, they're particularly useful for these tasks. So, fraud is like a needle in a haystack, except it can commonly be linked to some core behavior of a fraudster, like using a device to spin up multiple cards and stealing email identities. And we can learn from these historical events of fraud to predict that and if it will happen again. So in conclusion, like a good model doesn't just find patterns in data and through all these various algorithms I described before, but also takes into account like this real phenomenon that happens. And so really it can find patterns that are hard for us to see, or more importantly, like disprove the relationships we think we see. So I was, went over what machine learning is generally, specifically like a supervised machine learning approach, any supervised machine learning approach, including, ones that we use, what you have to do is you have to look for signals that have predicted fraud in the past. And really, we have such a huge data network, and we have over 15 years of historical data. And when it comes to supervised machine learning, we kind of need a target to kind of set our eyes on. When we were thinking of housing price, we have all the components of a house, and we looked at other examples of houses to say, well, with these components, 2 bedrooms, 2,000 square feet, and it's going to be this many dollars, right? And then that way, when we see a new house, we can say, oh, well, it looks like this, the price should be like that. And that goes the same for fraud. Like we see, tons of transactions. Some of them have resulted in chargebacks or other sorts of fraud signals. And so when we see a new order, we can say, well, does it kind of look like that or does it not? And that's where that grading comes into play. And that's exactly what supervised machine learning is doing. So we use that target variable of fraud or whatever else it is that we're trying to predict, and we calibrate those models and algorithms to improve its predictions. And using the fraud label of other types of feedback like refunds, we can grade transactions and determine if they will likely be bad or not. And this is the Omniscore. And that's why passing back and all that data, all that feedback that we get, whether it's refunds, chargebacks, or off declines, it's very important, not only to us, but to the results that you get. And while I did just talk about chargebacks, like I really want to drive that point home. So supervised learning, it does capture historical trends of fraud activity based on individual risk. And really more data is more better. And it's not just our data network that we have in a history of chargebacks, but we have Kount and Equifax data combined now. We have more data than just a merchant by themselves, and definitely more than our competitors. Fraud can be elusive, but by having that piece of the signal and other things, like this is really pivotal into improving the performance of that score. So we can have good data, but how do we make good data better? How do we make good data useful? And how we do that is standard practice is feature engineering. What is feature engineering? It's a way of combining or augmenting data to make it more usable and effective for machine learning models. So think of this, when it comes to a transaction, and like the payment methods and stuff like that, having a billing or shipping address is really important, obviously depending on the type of transaction. But billing and shipping address, they're both good features and they do tell us about the payment and order, but we can do even more than that. Like, for example, we can have the distance between billing and shipping address. And for example, say you just moved recently to a house across the street. If you looked at those and your billing address may be at your old residence, but you want it shipped to your new place. Well, those addresses will be really close. Even if you moved across town, it'd be super close. But say that a fraudster stole someone's identity and they were located in a different state, a different country, or it could be totally across the world, who knows? The distance between that, like the stolen information and where they want the item shipped to or something to commit fraud, right? They can be really far away. And that's kind of how, we can take these two important things and make even more use out of them. And it tells us more about what fraud is or what it could look like. And, that goes to say that, in this scenario, this may be, where the physical or the shipping and the billing address are both important. And it really depends on the order. That's why we have all these different sorts of tuned models and stuff like that. We combine them in ways to know, ahead of time what's going to be important. And that's what goes into that decision. So, and really more data and better data means more confidence in our scores and better results for you.
There we go.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. And so I just wanted to, again, highlight that this is why receiving chargeback and refund data is so important. This is the feedback data point that provides Omniscore examples of what your fraud looks like. You have various options for sending that chargeback or refund data to Kount. The first one is you can send a file over. You can send it to the support team at support@kount.com or to your CSM. The second option is you can send us the data using the RESTful API. This will automate that chargeback process for you and simplify it. Lastly, you have the option to mark transactions that have resulted in a chargeback manually in the Agent Web Console. But again, having this information is vital because let's say most of those chargebacks are coming from Austin, Texas. This piece of information can help Omniscore display this data and the score for future evaluations and thus assign it that appropriate level of risk. And so now I'm just going to pass it back to Sean and Maddie.
So we have great data, right? But how do we know that our model is capturing all the latest trends in fraud? Well, we update the models and data in real time, daily, weekly, seasonally, really at every cadence you can imagine. These models, they're built to automatically identify new patterns and important fraud predictors, even before experts sees them. So, for example, so last year, one of our models picked up a new risky feature in May. A couple months later, one of our fraud experts, Brady, he was chatting with other industry experts and noticing, patterns in data. And he asked me about that feature. Well, it turns out that I went and took a look and I said, well, the model automatically picked this up a few months ago. And imagine if we didn't use machine learning, then we would need to rewrite rules and monitor all the time. So yeah, not only are chargebacks useful, meaning, our data is super important, but, updating the model and updating our data is also extremely important. And so we update the models and our data in real time, daily, weekly, and seasonally, really any cadence you can imagine. So that we can kind of stay ahead of the curve with identifying and highlighting new fraud patterns. But you don't just have to take our word for it. So last year, one of our models started picking up a new risky feature in May. And then a few months later, one of our fraud experts. You might know him, Brady Harrison. He's done countless webinars. He was chatting with other industry experts and looking at the data himself and noticing patterns, and reached out to me and asked, well, are our models capturing this? I said, as a matter of fact, they are. And they started capturing it a few months ago. So if we didn't use machine learning, we would be reliant on people like rewriting rules and doing tons of research and monitoring all the time. It's not to say we don't already do that, we do, but this helps us stay ahead of that. And really, this is the power of a machine learning first approach. Because if we didn't build this in such a way to where our models could pick this up ahead of time, the bad actors, the fraudsters, they would stay ahead of us. And so really, we need to evolve with them. It's an adversarial system.
Thank you, Sean. I'll pass over to Adriana.
Thank you, Maddie. And so as stated, not only do we update our models on a regular basis, but you do have the option of having different models as well for different segments of your traffic. Let's say you are an international company with e-commerce sites operating in different countries, and let's say one of those is in Canada. You can segment your traffic for your Canada store or Canadian commerce to allow it to have its own Omniscore model and separate it from the US commerce. That way any patterns that might emerge in Canada can be captured by that model. Patterns that emerge in the US can be captured by the US Omniscore model. And Sean will go into this deeper here shortly, but I just wanted to highlight that as a preview for what's coming. Back to you, Sean and Maddie.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I will get back to that pretty soon, but I do still kind of want to tie up some of these loose ends around, we went over the importance of data and supervised machine learning, and kind of want to talk about unsupervised machine learning a little bit and see how that impacts outcomes. So what is unsupervised machine learning? Simply put, it's using data and algorithms without an explicit label or other target values to find patterns in data, right? So for example, supervised, we might have housing price to kind of guide our predictions, but unsupervised machine learning might answer questions more like, what houses look similar? That's kind of a much different question. So we need to have different approaches for that. Different types of algorithms you may have thought, or approaches that you may have thought of, is anomaly detection. So what looks out of the ordinary. Clustering might answer what looks like these other things. Or manifold learning, what is the shape or the topology of this data? So Kount's unsupervised machine learning uses advanced algorithms and models to detect transaction anomalies and behaviors much faster and much more accurately, and on a much more scalable basis than human judgment by itself. Like I was describing, mountains of data, right? It catches emerging fraud attacks that supervised machine learning models can't catch before they result in chargebacks, right? Like, there could be emerging fraud attacks and patterns, but because we may not have seen these like newly developing fraud markers ahead of time, we can't predict that we'll see that before, but we can see these changes in real time and know what we should be alerted to and adjust results based on that. So we can see the behavioral changes of fraud networks in real time. So I kind of just really quickly want to illustrate this story on screen. I've seen countless scenarios, kind of similar to this before. So say we start with like one transaction. This is your transaction. And, there's a lot of information related to that order. We have device, credit card, email, all sorts of things. Now, say that order, it actually directly links to someone else in your household, and you may share the payment method, right? But, maybe you're not using the same device. That's totally normal. Two people, two different phones, right? Or different computers, smart TVs, whatever, making a purchase. Using different emails associated with that order too, right? But you're linked by a credit card. And then say that device is linked to another email or some other, PII, and really that email may be compromised. A fraudster may have stolen digital identity or physical identity or something. And they went ahead and they actually stole tons of that kind of information, tons of credit cards and emails and stuff like that. So really, really quickly, what could be contained just, might look really safe to you and your family, could really grow out of control into a vast fraud network. And so what we see at the end of the day, even though it's just your one transaction, we can see tons of, like 5 different credit cards, 3 devices, 10 emails, and 5 different billing addresses. And the important thing to see here is, while by itself, your order may not have looked that risky, if we look at the bigger picture, we see that there's multiple indicators of risk here. And so that's the power of unsupervised learning networks, network science, and graph algorithms. This is how unsupervised learning helps us understand users personally at scale. It uses these advanced algorithms and models to detect these transaction anomalies much faster and more accurately and a way more scalable basis. So it really does capture these emerging trends that supervised machine learning can't, really predict ahead of time before they would result in chargebacks.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. That is super helpful to know. And I really like the line that you use, understanding users personally at scale. That's really the mission that Kount aims to achieve. But on the alternative, we received quite a few questions ahead of the webinar asking the reverse, why is this one specific customer receiving a certain Omniscore? And in that, we just want to address, and Adriana has some advice on how you can sort of look at that. I will pass over to you, Adriana.
Thank you, Maddie. And I just want to point out that's a great question. When I was a CSM, I'd get it all the time. My advice is to always check the link analysis in the bottom left corner of the order details page, along with the persona linking. For example, is the geox displaying a high-risk country? Do you see that the same address has been linked with 20 other orders, and each of those orders has a different payment method? Well, this could point to a card testing attack. If you have a good customer with a historical record with you, meaning that they've purchased with you before, they're safe, they're trustworthy, and they tend to receive a low Omniscore for this particular transaction, I would say follow the same steps. If, for example, the network associated with that order is a high-risk location, say a library that tends to lend itself to shared devices, this could point to why such a low Omniscore was received. Maybe during the time they placed the order, they were traveling and placed it from the Philippines, and for that reason, their data points aren't lining up. For example, their address, like billing and shipping address, might be in California, but the device location is pointing to the Philippines, a mismatch. So the link analysis and that persona linking provide a plethora of data to point you in the right direction. The most important thing to remember is sometimes good customers accidentally engage in behaviors practiced by fraudsters. As fraudsters adapt and get smarter, they engage in behavior that might initially look safe. This is why it is so important to stay vigilant and rely on a robust solution like Kount that is data and technology driven to help you stay ahead of those emerging fraud trends. So now I'm just going to pass it back to Sean.
Great, thanks. I love how you illustrate that story there. Now, really, a good model is nothing without good data. So I kind of want to go through a simple example of, our address data. So here's an example of performance of those who use address not so well. So say we're looking at the screen here, and we have a few different things going on. The red line is going to be the industry average baseline for a chargeback rate. And then the black line is Kount average. And then the blue is a collection of orders that are not using address, or there's poor address utilization, even though address is a core component to these orders. And what we see over time is, not all types of payments are super dependent on address, like delivery of digital goods. They may not be super dependent on a physical address. Only the billing info would be important. Regardless, if you're not passing address information where it's important, and fraudsters can kind of game the system and might be trying many different things and find some sort of vulnerability. So without address, there's significant payment fraud and refund risk. And while over time we're always developing new ways to kind of combat this fraud, and we're able to drive it down over time, it just showed that this population was susceptible to that attack, even though we did keep it in line. It's just it is exposed to that risk.
And of course, we understand that the nature of every business is not the same. Not everyone has physical products to ship out. Some are digital and some may be services. For this reason, you may not be capturing a shipping address. At a minimum, if you're able to capture that billing address, we would strongly encourage you to send it over. You can check what is being sent to Kount by either contacting your internal technical resources or logging into the Kount AWC and looking over the order details of a transaction. If you see an address value listed, you are passing in the data. Another very important component is to make sure that the data is being passed in the correct format. Data validation is very important just to make sure that, if it's valid, then we'll be able to link across the networks with it. Otherwise, it's just, I love that. What is that saying? Garbage in, garbage out. So validate that data. Now I'm going to pass it back to Sean.
Great, thanks. Here's another good example of trying to utilize the data as best as we can. And in this case is payment token linking and card data. We do link on cards and provide risk signals in real time. What we have here is a similar case to before. We have the industry average baseline of the chargeback rate, and then we have Kount's average baseline chargeback rate. And then we have a population of merchants who are underutilizing payment token linking because they don't send us card. And this population of transactions starts at a regular low level of chargebacks. Then there was a fraud attack resulting in higher chargebacks than average due to the susceptibility. While still performing significantly better than the industry average, they could do better. And that's the nature of fraud, right? Fraudsters are always trying different things, and we do our best to stay ahead of that. And we generally do a great job, and we just want to do even better for you. We have partners who can help you with this if you don't have a card or payment token integration, such as TokenX and Spreedly and other companies. If you don't have the tech resources to get it taken care of.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Sean. That was a really great point. Again, so if your team doesn't have the tech resources to implement payment token, we have partners who can help do this for you. We also realize the reasons for an inability to pass in payment data might be related to integrations with your payment processor or any other providers that could be limiting your access to this information. So once again, if you have limitations and are unable to pass the data, we understand, but where possible, we strongly encourage you to send it over so that it can form part of that evaluation when Omniscore is looking to assess the risk and safety of your transaction. So now I'm going to pass it back to Sean.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so we went over many different approaches to fighting fraud, really all approaches that we're using. We went over the importance of good data and thinking about how to model these types of things to make really good predictions. But last but not least, how do we know that the model performance is any good? We've made the score out of the risk of bad transactions, but when it's right or when it's wrong, what do we do? Well, a metric that a lot of you may have used or heard of, simply put, accuracy, is how often were we right or wrong? Now, in the case of when most of the traffic is really, really good, it's not necessarily a good metric. For example, if we had 99% of the time, we had good transactions and 1% of the time bad transactions, and then we just guessed that every single transaction was good, we would be 99% accurate. But the problem is that 1%, even though 1% is the total traffic, we'd be missing 100% of the fraud or other bad things that are happening. So accuracy isn't necessarily a good case in these kinds of scenarios. So we need things like precision and recall as a metric for the needle in the haystack problem that we're facing with fraud. To what is precision and recall? Well, I'll start simply with true positives and false positives, true negatives and false negatives. And I'll use the analogy of sickness because it's pretty easy to get started with. So think of a true positive and a model prediction would be if a model predicted that sick people were correctly identified as sick, and then a false positive, healthy people incorrectly identified as sick. True negative, healthy people correctly identified as healthy, and false negative, sick people incorrectly identified as healthy. Now, I know that sounds a little backwards, but this is the way that we think about fraud. Like you would want to first imagine, well, I don't want to identify the sick people. I want to identify the healthy people. But like, remember, what's our target? What's the question we're asking? It's not, is this person healthy or is this transaction good? It's actually the opposite. Is this person sick? Or really, is this transaction fraud? So just like the true positive, sick people correctly identified as sick, we'd be thinking of it would be a true positive if it was fraud and it was correctly identified as fraud by the model, et cetera. So really, precision is how often we were correct, and recall is how much fraud did we actually find. So in this graph specifically, think of, or using this graph as an example, say we have 100 observations identified at a specific point. 20 are false positive or really incorrectly identified as fraud. 80 are true positive, correctly labeled as bad or fraud. And there's approximately 120 that are actually fraud in the sample. So that means at the highlighted point, with 100 observations, 60% of the fraud is actually being captured, which is recall, while 80% of the items are actually fraud or are precision, or in other terms, 20% are false positives. So we extend this idea over all scores and we get precision recall area under the curve. And that's how we can hone in on good fraud fighting strategy for you. And that's also how you can actually think of it in your own terms. Now, I just really wanted to drive the point home on how we can literally turn the dials on machine learning and on Omniscore to make it work best for you. So what we see here is on the left, we have an example of like a high margin product and high risk tolerance because of that high margin. Let's say like digital goods or clothing. And then on the right-hand side, we see a product that may be with smaller margins and thus a smaller risk tolerance, say like gift cards or, orders from a QSR or something like that. And, they represent orders within a specific population. Say this could be, an Omniscore range of like, 30 to 50, or say this is specific location or something like that. And over this range of products and scores or whatever, there's different potential fraud rates. And so in this case, we see a 60% fraud rate for this good in this specific geography. And the thing is okay, so what? What does that mean? Well, that means that there's a certain threshold where essentially you're not making as much money before, or, you really start to lose revenue. And so that there's more fraud being committed. So simply what we can do here is say, well, since a fraud rate is a lot higher than we'd like, why don't we just ask Omniscore, hey, instead of declining things that only at a score of 30, let's turn it up to 40 in that range of 30 to 50. And we can take that range or that fraud rate of 60%, and we could drive it all the way down to 30 or 20 or even 10%, regaining all of that lost revenue and, honestly, a lot more happy customers, which is both, super impactful to the bottom line. And really, business and legal policies, they change over time and might need to use a combination of, other rules as well. But we can literally just use Omniscore by itself, and it can take care of most of this for you right out of the box to save you money, bring in more revenue, and keep customers happy.
Thank you so much, Sean. And we're going to go through our conclusion. So that's our presentation for today. Sean, pass it to you.
Great. Thanks so much. Yeah, in conclusion, a good model can find patterns that are hard for us to see, or more importantly, they can disprove the relationships we think we see. And this is why a machine learning first approach that leverages a vast data network, tons of experience, and really organized in such a way that is best with all these things at its disposal. Don't forget, you can use Omniscore by itself and be super effective in saving your bottom line and keeping customers happy. But really, you can combine it with rules that are shaped to your specific business policies and fit your business needs. So start with common basic Omniscore rules. As you develop your fraud journey, and whether you're going through a chargeback program or trying to reclaim lost revenue or whatever, decrease customer friction or these other things, as you develop your fraud strategy, you can fine-tune rule sets beyond Omniscore based on your business needs. And then, this raw machine learning first approach, this is where you do a raw machine learning first and then add business policy optimization, like geofencing and other things. So how much time do you spend on fighting fraud? We do it every day. It's our job. We have decades of expertise on fraud, machine learning, and AI, and we really just want to help you do your best. And we research and update our knowledge, study and update data constantly, retrain our models, etc. And you can just use the Omniscore and take advantage of our data network, and it works better and harder, so you don't have to.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Adriana and Sean. Really appreciate all of the illustrations you were able to offer us today, and kind of tips and pointers, and really the in-depth details of what is Omniscore and what our team does to support customers. So thank you both so much. We received a handful of customer questions, more than a handful, really. We received a lot. So appreciate our customers for sharing their thoughts ahead of time. Now we're going to go through our Q&A. So I will start with a question from Aaron H., which is, I love my complex rules. Can it really be as simple as decisioning based on Omniscore alone? Sean, I think you kind of alluded to this earlier, but I'll pass to you to answer.
Yeah, simply put, yes, you can. It's really that simple. You can just take the Omniscore first approach. It has a lot to do with turning the dials that I was mentioning earlier. So, for example, if you're not collecting the revenue that you'd like to receive, and you're okay with, maybe the potential risk of, having a few more orders turn out bad, but you can turn away less customers and collect that revenue. And on the other side of things, you can, if you're going through significant fraud attacks, you increase that Omniscore threshold a little bit, and simply put, you cannot worry about those fraud attacks so much. So really, it has a lot to do with identifying what works best for you based on your business goals, and we can help you there.
Thanks, Sean. Our next question is from Judith R. It is, what does Omniscore not represent? What are some assumptions that should not be made based on Omniscore?
Yeah, so I'll take this one. So it's an analysis based on the vast amount of data that we have and that was passed into us from the customer merchant side. It tells a story behind a transaction. It is our recommended analysis, and we're giving you the information to make an extremely informed decision. The assumption that should not be made about Omniscore is that it absolutely knows everything. If you have a case where you know the customer and they reach out and confirm that they are who they say they are, but yet their order was declined because of a low Omniscore and so forth, then you can approve that order or add the customer to a temporary VIP approved list, and they may because the reason is they might just, as we mentioned earlier, they might have just accidentally engaged in behavior that looked bad. If you have additional pieces of internal information that augment your evaluation or your decision, use it, and where possible, incorporate this information into your strategy or even pass it in account. As Sean has said multiple times today, more data, more confidence.
Yeah, thank you so much. Our next question is from Hannah B. Is Omniscore merchant specific, or is it just the same across all merchants? Meaning, does it adjust according to how a merchant decisions their order specifically? Sean, I'll pass that one to you.
Great, thanks so much. Actually, it kind of does all of it. Omniscore can tailor very specifically to your own business's needs. So when you do have enough data, like I was mentioning before, those segments of traffic, we can really curate that score so that it fits your business needs. However, when there's not so much data, that's when we start to lean into the data network a little bit more, and create those scores more based on everything that we see. So really, what it comes down to is no matter what the machine learning models are doing, is they're learning on all of that order history, all those chargebacks, all those declines across everywhere. So really, it's about leaning into the strengths where they're there, whether you have a lot of data or not, whether your customers have a lot of history or not, whether you've had fraud agents that work on a whole lot of orders or not. We're using all of it and really still being tailored to your own business's needs.
Thank you. Our next question is from Cheyenne T. Why are some orders approved when they should not have been, or why are some orders declined when they should not have been?
Yeah, this is a great question. I would say what determines if an order is approved or declined is the rules and policies that are in place in the account. If you have questions regarding why an order was approved or declined, I would encourage you to check the rules triggered section in the order details page. That will point in the direction of the reason behind the approval or the decline. There is an edge case where if a transaction comes through and it doesn't meet the conditions of any of your policies, those are automatically approved. So if that area is blank, that's the reason for it. Now, if this question is in regard, well, it was a low Omniscore, it should have been declined, or it was a high Omniscore, it should have been approved. Make sure the policies and rules that you have in place in the account match up with those assumptions. So make sure that there is a rule that sets that if the transaction is less than 10 Omniscore to decline, and that if the order is, say, an Omniscore greater than 80, that it is approved. So I would say check those rules and policies, make sure they line up with the the assumptions that you have in mind. And whenever you have a question, check that rules triggered section in the order details page.
Thank you. Our next question is from Vladimir L. What are the differences between Omniscore and persona scores? Does it make sense to use both of them? Sean, I'll pass that to you.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. Well, honestly, the persona score has had a great track record of catching behavior in real time. However, Omniscore not only uses those core technologies of the persona score, it expands on them with a much wider array of historical fraud trends, as well as the emerging behaviors to fight fraud in real time. And furthermore, Omniscore is actively being developed and researched to give the best results.
Thank you. And last question is from Dan B. How can we test if rules are working or if we are losing sales due to too many restrictions?
Thanks, Maddie. That's also a great question. I would say the rule optimization analysis can help look over the performance of your account. It can also help you identify rules that might be too aggressive and formulate a strategy for decreasing that decline rate. Rule optimization analysis can be performed in Data Mart. I encourage merchants to make small changes to their Omniscore and then monitor performance for a month or two, just enough time to let chargebacks age in. If your chargeback rate does not increase significantly, you can then continue to update those thresholds to make your rule set less aggressive and thus increase your approvals. Kount offers a policy management and optimization service, as I mentioned earlier. as part of our professional services, our team can help you achieve your desired goals and walk you through that process. It's, if you say you want to do an optimization, 3 months out of the year, or maybe quarterly and so forth, the team is there to help you get those rules and policies to where you want them to be, so that that we can continue to meet your business goals and metrics.
Awesome. All right, Sean, Adriana, thank you both so much again for this wonderful presentation. This concludes the end of our session today. So to our customers, thank you again for watching. If there is anything else that you need from our end, please always feel welcome to reach out to your dedicated customer success manager or to support@kount.com. We're always happy to help with your questions. Thank you so much for being here for today's session, and we're going to close it out. All right.